Lemon balm is an herb that I always say brings joy. It is a happy plant. I've never seen anybody smell lemon balm and not immediately smile. Members of the mint family are ones, if new gardeners are always like, what herbs do you recommend that I grow? I always try to steer them towards mint relatives because, number one, they're easy to grow. Once you get them established, you should have them for years to come. And they're just incredibly beneficial in so many ways, right? So
hello, fellow plant lovers, and welcome back to the Beet Podcast. I am here today with an incredible guest, Bevin Cohen of Small House Farm and the author of Herbs in Every Season. We have a very juicy, exciting episode talking about all of our favorite herbs, how to grow them and forage them and use them in your kitchen, as well as some fascinating stories and background and tips about farming herbs on a small scale, growing up in northern Michigan, and the beautiful world of plants that are often overlooked when we're so focused on vegetables and fruits and those traditional edibles. So without further ado, please welcome Bevin Cohen to The Beet.
hi, Logan. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to hang out with you.
Sweet. Yeah, I am super stoked as well. I am the editor of the Epic Gardening blog and a former organic vegetable farmer turned mountain homesteader and aspiring herbalist myself. So I am absolutely stoked to pick your brain about everything you know about herbs. It sounds like you've been in this world for quite some time. Could you give us a little background origin story of how the seeds of herbalism and herb farming were sown in your life?
I like how you put that. So I've been fascinated with plants my entire life. I grew up with my grandmother in an apartment on the edge of town. So we were butted up against probably like 1,500 acres of woods. And I would spend a lot of time out in the forest, running around, climbing trees, doing things that kids do. And, one day when I was out there, I was, scavenging for berries or whatever it was. And I'd come across some wintergreen berries, which was one of my favorite little snacks as a kid. And I was eating the berries and having a good time with it. And I started to think about, just in this little patch of woods that I spend all my time in, there are so many awesome plants, like these berries and all these fun trees and whatever it might be. And I thought, gosh, in this little section of my world, if there's this many cool plants, how many cool plants are there in the whole wide world? And that started a lifelong obsession with learning about plants and all of the wonderful things that they offer us. Luckily for me, my grandmother was very supportive of this. She took me to the library all the time growing up. It was a weekly, trip to the library to get books. And, my book started to evolve from story books and that sort of thing into books about plants and the natural world. And that is an obsession that has continued to this day. I always say I don't have a book problem. I have a bookshelf problem. I just don't have enough place for them. And what's cool about plants, whether we're growing them or eating them or whatever we might choose to do with them, is that we could learn about them our whole lives, and there are still new and wonderful things that we can learn. It's a lifetime of experience and adventure for sure.
What a beautiful story and such a lovely way to grow up. So you were able to forge that connection with the outdoors and with the plants so early on, which I envy a little bit because I grew up in the city and I didn't find plants until a little bit later in my adolescence and early adulthood. And wintergreen is such an interesting kind of beginner plant that found you. Can you describe the climate and the specific type of forest that you were running around in and how you were magnified to that specific plant?
Sure. So we're in central Michigan here, so it's mostly hardwood forest, so oak trees and maple trees, but we have quite a bit of evergreen as well. White pine is our state tree. And, this expansive woods that I would spend time in was mostly oaks and maples and that sort of thing. And wintergreen, it's Gaultheria procumbens is the species, and it's a low-growing plant that spreads by rhizomes. It's a beautiful little guy, and it covers the forest floor everywhere that we're at. And, so for me, it was just so abundant that I couldn't help but notice it. You know what I mean? It's got these beautiful bright red berries, and I love to snack on berries. So it just caught my eye, and I was like, well, this is a delicious little treat. And as I've grown up and I've moved through the world and to different places and that sort of thing, wintergreen is a plant that just keeps popping up for me. It always just is in places and that sort of thing. When I first started dating Heather, who is now my wife of many, many years, when we first started dating, I would take her out. We'd go on hikes in the woods and have picnics and stuff. And I would, try to impress her by showing her all the plants I could identify because, that's how you woo the ladies, right? And wintergreen was one of the first plants I showed to her. And I said, let me tell you the story. And we'd snack on wintergreen berries together. And so, this is a plant that has been with me for most of my life. And for me, it's such a perfect example of relationship with the natural world, which ultimately at the heart of everything that we do here at Small House Farm, in the books that I write, in our teaching, whatever it might be, is developing this relationship with the natural world around us. And so for me, wintergreen, we go way back. We're old buddies. So it's just such a good example of that relationship that we can have with plants.
So you and wintergreen are old homies, and you have followed that plant throughout your life, or more the plant has found you and followed you, which is such a relatable thing. For me, my plant is yarrow. Yarrow has always been with me. I've been traveling the country for many years since I, left home and became an organic farmer, and yarrow's just always popped up and been the little healer in my life. So I love that everyone has hopefully a plant that has kind of been their origin plant and has been with them through the journey. And that brings me to something really cool I heard you talk about, that you like to think of herbs as a lifestyle. Can you kind of describe that philosophy to us so that people who may think of herbs as, only something used in the medicinal herbalism world or only used in the kitchen, how can we go beyond that framework to see herbs as, a broader way to just connect to the natural world?
Oh, absolutely. So, when Timber Press first approached me about writing Herbs in Every Season, I'd done a couple other projects with them in the past, and they'd come to me about this book, and what they were looking for was a medicinal herbal. That's what, we want a book about health and beauty and the types of things that we could do with plants. And I thought, well, that's interesting enough, but I've kind of written books on this topic already. So I'd like to delve a little deeper into the world of plants. For me, really, I wanted to write a book that was based on real life. As a plant person, as a gardener, a forager, an herbalist, whatever label I want to use here, I can't just take herbs and say, oh, these are for health and beauty. I can't just say these herbs are just for use in the kitchen. I can't just say these are things that I grow in the garden. If I was going to draw a Venn diagram of the way that I use herbs, it would literally be a circle because of the overlap of these things is incredible here. So I thought if we're going to work on this book, we have to approach this in the way that I live my life. Is herbs are in everything that we do. They're in the kitchen. They're in the apothecary. They're in my garden. They're in my forest, right? So we need to write a book that showcases how herbs are a way of life, right? How they are impacting us in everything that we do. And they thought that was interesting enough that they said, well, go ahead and work on that. We'll see how that turns out. So I really delved into this. And then as it happened, we started to see the seasonal lens that we were working through these herbs with, which really becomes the cornerstone of the book itself. It's herbs in every season, right? Is that as the seasons progress, these herbs change, right? They grow and they change and they flower, they make seeds, whatever it might be. And then through those seasons, we as people also change. We grow and flower and make seeds or whatever it might be. And our needs change as well. And so the herbs are right there lockstep with us. As they change, we change, and they're always there for us when we need them. So it was just for me, many years in the making this book was this ability to slow down and observe, again, this relationship that we have with plants, but through this seasonal lens where I came to realize that in every day, in every way, herbs were there with me. They were a part of my life, my lifestyle. So I'm really hoping that we can convey this message in the book. I want folks to be able to pick this book up and read it and say, oh, I see how herbs can make my life more complete.
Gosh, I'm over here just wanting to snap and clap every part of what you just said. It was so eloquently put, especially the way that plants don't want to be confined, kind of like you described. They don't want to be confined to just one use or one function in the landscape or in the ecosystem and in our lives. They're constantly evolving. We're constantly learning new ways to interact with them, to grow them, to use them, and learn from them clearly. And that seasonal focus, I think, is so important because particularly with herbs, but also with many vegetables and fruits, there's different parts of the plant that we want to use throughout the year. So in the book, you have each of these plant profiles, and you have the plants organized by the season that you primarily harvest them. Could you give us some examples of a plant that you will change what portion of it you harvest throughout the year based on the season, and why that plant part might shift if you're going for the berries, the flowers, the fruit, the roots? Of course, it's based on availability, but it's also based on specific compounds and constituents that are in those parts of the plant. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. So I think one of the best examples that we can talk about here is utilizing the roots of plants. And while the roots of the plant are available, of course, to us at any point in the plant's life cycle, right? We can harvest roots anytime that we want. To get the most potent root that we can harvest, we want to harvest the root when the rest of the plant is dormant, when it's putting its energy down into that root system. So for here in Michigan, that would be in the early winter or in the spring, whatever it might be, when the plant is dormant before it started its vegetative growth, is the best time to harvest those roots. And that's also, you need to give these plants time to live their life cycle. So let's use chicory as an example. I love to harvest chicory root. It is absolutely delicious. We've got some really fun recipes that we developed in the book utilizing the chicory root. But we have to harvest that chicory root when the plant is dormant. It's going to, not only, if we wanted to look at it from a health and wellness point of view, going to be more potent, but even from a flavor perspective, it's going to be more potent. Many of your listeners, I mean, obviously being gardeners, are familiar with plant propagation, so they understand that there's certain times to harvest certain parts of plants for when we're wanting to propagate them, right? So when we're harvesting root cuttings, or if we're doing by leaf cutting or whatever it might be to propagate these plants, there's certain parts in the plant's life when it's putting its energy towards that portion of it, right? So we're going to be harvesting flowers, obviously, during peak flowering. We harvest leaves during vegetative growth. We harvest roots when the plants are dormant. But it's not so much, even in the book, that we're talking about the plants through the season of when I might harvest them, but also we talk about them through the lens of the season when we might enjoy them the most, when they might be the most beneficial to us. Like an example that's going to jump to mind for me is shiitake mushroom, which ironically isn't really even a plant, right? But it's in the book. We talk about trees, we talk about fungi, we talk about things that, botanically speaking, aren't necessarily herbs, but they're wonderful plants. Shiitake mushroom we've put into the winter chapter of the book, even though right now in spring is when I'm harvesting a majority of our shiitake mushrooms off of our logs. We're harvesting in the spring, but I've included it in the winter section of the book because I find it to be so useful that time of year, in particular because of the vitamin D content that we can find in mushrooms. And in the wintertime, we need more vitamin D in our diets. So this is when the shiitake mushroom could be the most beneficial for us. So when we look at these herbs through these seasonal lens, it's not always about when we harvest it, but it's also sometimes about when we might make the most use of it.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. And I did not know that about the vitamin D content, not of just shiitakes, but edible mushrooms in general. That is super fascinating. And so you went into chicory root, and that is an herb we use a lot in my house just as a coffee substitute. And so that's such an important point you made, that when the plant is funneling its energy into the root, that is the best time to harvest it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the time we want to use it. Is that what you were saying?
Exactly right. But I'm going to back up a little bit, and you just used the words coffee substitute. And as a coffee connoisseur, I will say there is no substitute for coffee. We will consider chicory to be a coffee alternative, right? It's a caffeine-free alternative to coffee. And we do use it in some recipes where we can do it like a traditional roasted chicory root as a coffee. We've substituted chicory root, roasted chicory root. Sometimes you can add coffee to like chocolate to really enhance the flavor of chocolate. So we do some recipes where we actually replace the coffee with the chicory root in like a chocolate cake recipe. You know what I mean? So yeah, we really found some fun ways to do this. When we were working on the recipes, I wanted the recipes to be simple enough that anybody could enjoy them, even if they don't have a lot of experience in the kitchen. But I also wanted to kind of push my experience level with these plants, you know what I mean? So we did some slightly off the wall types of things like that, where we really tried to explore how can we push the boundary of the uses of this plant and have it still be enjoyable for folks. Ultimately, the recipes, as well as much of the book, is just trying to get people to look at plants through a slightly different point of view, changing our perspective a little bit on the plants around us. I've been a gardener and a seed saver for many years. And it really, honestly, it was the seed saving journey that started to shift my perspective on the world of plants. But every time I can look at plants through a different lens or a different point of view, I see that there's so much more that they can offer me that I didn't realize, So throughout the book, we're really trying to help people see things in just a slightly different way than what they might be used to.
Wow, super creative. And I love the creative approach to the recipes as well. So you mentioned you've been saving seeds for all these years. Can you go back how did you get from that little boy playing in the woods with the wintergreen berries to actually starting an herb farm, beginning to save seeds, and now being an educator?
It is a slippery slope. I tend to get very excited and obsessed with things. I always say that my wife is the most patient woman on the planet because she has to deal with me all the time. And I get really into things. And, so like I said, growing up, I was really into plants. And as we studied the uses of plants, and as they be food or medicine or however we wanted to look at them, I started to really explore the historical connections that plants have, how we can follow these plants back through, we could say the spice routes or the trade routes or the cultural significant uses of plants or whatever it might be. All these different things about plants were fascinating to me. So I was kind of skirting around the peripheral of seeds and the role that they played, and I didn't quite understand. I wasn't making that connection. It wasn't quite connecting for me just yet. And we used to go to a nature center not far from us that would have, they have an old homestead there from built from the 1800s. And on weekends, you could come out and you could learn about skills from the 1800s, right? How to churn butter and making maple syrup or whatever it might be. And they had an old historic heirloom garden. And I would go there to visit, and there was something about it that was calling to me. And I didn't quite understand. At this time in my life, I didn't really even know what an heirloom meant, right? I just knew that there was something about these old plants that was very fascinating. And I got to meet the garden caretaker one time. And I was asking him all these questions. And he says, you know what, Bevin, I need to teach you this in a different way. You need to see this from a different point of view, is essentially what he said to me. And he grabbed a handful of dried beans off of this plant, and he stuck them in my hand. And he said, you take these seeds home, you grow them in your garden, you save those seeds, and you share them with your friends. And so I did. I took those seeds home, and they were Cherokee Trail-a-Tear black beans. And I took them home and I grew them right outside of our window. And these were, to this day, the most prolific pole beans I've ever grown are these Trail-a-Tear beans. They're fantastic, right? And they're super useful. You can eat them as green beans. You can eat them as dry beans. I didn't eat any of the beans. I saved them all. I let them all go to seed, and I saved all those seeds. And then the next year, I had to share them with my friends. And I wasn't sure how to do that. So we organized a little tiny seed swap. I'd never been to a seed swap or anything like that before, but I thought, if you build it, they will come type of thing. And there was 100 people that showed up to this thing. People I didn't even know who they were. And I shared my seeds with all of them. I said, take these beans home, but under the guise of you save your seeds, you share them with your friends. And the next year we had that seed swap, and all those people came back and they brought seeds with them. And they said, I saved the seeds. Now what do I do? And that was a life-changing moment for me, Logan. It changed everything in my whole world, because I realized that that handful of beans had become hundreds of beans. A handful of seed savers quickly becomes hundreds of seed savers, right? This sharing of seeds and passing them down from one person to the next. And it unlocked something inside of me, of course, but it unlocked something here at Small House Farm that changed everything that we were doing. And we've started an incredible amount of seed preservation work here, which has helped us launch our herb farm. It's kind of found our niche where we've been able to fund the things that we're doing here, and it's really just snowballed the whole operation out of control, all from a handful of beans,
Wow. So you weren't only propagating the plant, you were propagating the passion for plants.
Yes.
And you spread that around. I love that so much. It's very poetic and, very metaphorical, of course, how you sowed the seed in all of those people and all of a sudden they're saving them. So I really want to know, for a few of the beginners out in our audience, a few definitions. Okay. So you spoke about heirloom, and this is something I write about very often. People get very confused. What is the definition of heirloom? And secondly, we touched on kind of the broader definition of an herb. Could you go into how you view both of those words and how you use them in your work?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So an heirloom in the world of seed saving it's a pretty general term that just simply means something like seed that has been saved and passed down for 50 years or more, right? 50 years is kind of like this benchmark of once we've shared a seed for this many generations, now it's considered an heirloom. From a seed saving point of view, heirlooms are always open pollinated. They're typically going to come back true to type, that sort of thing. I mean, does a seed need to be heirloom to save it and share it? No, most certainly it doesn't. But if somebody's been saving a seed and passing it down for that long, there's probably some good reasons we'd want to consider saving it too. It could be historical significance. It could be culturally important. It could be sentimental. There's all sorts of wonderful things. But we don't want to confine ourselves to just thinking about seed saving as it's got to be an heirloom variety. It's got to be whatever you love growing and eating. That's what you should be saving seeds from. You know what I mean? I have a friend, he's a tomato breeder. So he's always creating these new plants. And he always jokes that what he's doing is he's creating the heirlooms of tomorrow, right? And that's fun. That's a fun way to think about it because the quality of his plants are so good, people are going to want to save them and share them. But ultimately, as long as we're saving and sharing seeds, we're doing it right, whatever kind of label you want to put on them. That doesn't much matter.
Absolutely.
Thank you. To go back to herbs, I mean, botanically speaking, an herb is a plant with a fleshy green stem that dies down at the end of the year, as part of the definition of that. So what a limiting definition that could be when we want to utilize the word herb. So we could think about some of our favorite herbs, rosemary, thyme. By this botanical definition of herb, those wouldn't be considered herbs either. That's not how we want to be. So in the book, Herbs in Every Season, I use that term very loosely because like I mentioned, we're talking about trees, we're talking about fungi, we're talking about a lot of things that aren't botanically herbs, you know what I mean? But they fall under that umbrella well enough that we can use them. So herbs could maybe be plants that offer us flavor and health to enhance the vegetables and roots that we grow, something like that, you know what I mean? So we could be loosey-goosey with it, I guess. But again, I don't think it's important to define words as much as we just need to define what these plants mean to us as people. I think that's a more important way to look at it. But, some people, some botanists that may be tuning in may feel very differently about that. And they might like to stick to strict definitions. But I don't think we need to limit ourselves, especially when we're beginning. Gardeners or whatever it might be, we're already anxious about things. And we don't want to constrain ourselves with those types of thoughts. We just need to get out there, get in the soil, plant some seeds, grow something delicious, and just love every minute of it.
Absolutely. I like the chill approach, and we don't have to be super botanical or horticultural about it. I can definitely see how that's confining. And a lot of people get confused by that original definition you mentioned, that like an herb or an herbaceous perennial, which is a plant that doesn't produce woody stems. It essentially grows this lush growth each year, dies back to the ground. People think, oh my gosh, where did my plant go? And it's overwintering beneath the soil, then comes back up. But then that excludes like all of our annual, calendulas and cilantro and things. That excludes all of our amazing tree saps and coniferous trees and all of the different herbs we can harvest from woody plants. And then again, like those Mediterranean woody herbs that we literally can't live without. Like, how could we not have lavender and rosemary?
Exactly. But botanically speaking, a banana tree is an herb, right? So what a wild world we live in.
Yeah, humans are just always trying to define things to fit them in our paradigm, but nature's out there just like, this is what it is. I don't need to be perfectly labeled and put into your categories.
Right. I think, obviously sometimes there's a place for that where we do need to have that happening, and that, and people that specialize in that sort of thing, there's certainly a purpose for that. But for most of us, I don't think we need to worry about it so much. We just need to grow stuff that we love and just have a good time doing it.
Absolutely. I love that.
This episode of The Beet is sponsored by Shopify, a commerce platform we've been using here at Epic Gardening and our seed company, Botanical Interests, for over 6 years now. It makes the back end of building a business, whether it's online or offline, products or services, extremely, extremely easy. In the early days, when we were just selling Birdie's beds to you guys listening to the show, it was new to me. I didn't know too much about that. I knew a lot about gardening, and Shopify made the back-end process of adding products, dealing with sales tax, shipping, customer service, order tracking, etc., extremely, extremely easy. In fact, I would say it's the most important piece of software that we use here at Epic Gardening. So if you are running a business and you want to make that a little bit easier for yourself, we wholeheartedly recommend Shopify. You can get a free trial at shopify.com/thebeet. That's shopify.com/THEBEET. Now back to the show.
So let's shift gears a little bit and dig into the details of a few of your favorite plants. Like I said, in Herbs in Every Season, Bevin goes into these plant profiles that dig into the details of growing, harvesting, and using different herbs in different recipes. And I would love to go into some of your favorite options with our audience today. Maybe could we start with lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, one of my personal favorites?
Absolutely. And I love that you picked it, because if you were just to say to me, what are some of your favorite herbs, I would be hard pressed to pick any favorites, because I love them all so much. So I appreciate you kind of guiding the way here with that one. So let's go lemon balm. Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite herbs, lemon balm, is an herb that I always say brings joy. It is a happy plant. I've never seen anybody smell lemon balm and not immediately smile. It is just such a joyous plant. So, of course, it's in the mint family. Very easy to grow. Members of the mint family are ones, if new gardeners are always like, what herbs do you recommend that I grow? I always try to steer them towards mint relatives, because number one, they're easy to grow. Once you get them established, you should have them for years to come. And they're just incredibly beneficial in so many ways, right? So lemon balm is definitely one of them. And unlike, say, a straight up peppermint, who could be a little aggressive and pushy out there, lemon balm she's a little bit more polite, the plant will spread over time, but nothing like a mint plant will, you know what I mean? So she's really nice about that. Very easy to grow. We can certainly grow lemon balm from seed. It is a little slow to germinate, a little slow to get going, most certainly, but it can be done. Most often here, we propagate our lemon balm via root cuttings. You can just take a shovel and just chop a lemon balm in half with the shovel, just dig up a chunk of it and move it somewhere. And she's so hardy that she'll just take off and do just fine on her own. Really, really nice plant. It offers us so much. We've taken lemon balm. I'll just gather up the leaves, and sometimes I'll just put them in a jar, maybe with some cucumbers or something, and make a quick tea out of it. Oh, it's so refreshing and delicious and uplifting. It's just such a nice thing on a summer day. It's really, really nice. In the book, one of the recipes that we did a lemon balm shiitake mushroom stuffing. And I'm telling you what, oh my gosh, it was fantastic. The best part of making the recipes, of course, was the sampling of all of the things. And this one was definitely a winner for sure. I really enjoyed it. I love studying the names of plants too. And Melissa officinalis is such a good example of this, how much we can learn from the names of plants. So officinalis, officinale, any variations of that typically means when you see that in the species of a plant, it means that this plant has a long recorded history of medicinal use. So it's a very healthy plant to have. So that's fascinating. But even more fascinating is that Melissa is the Roman word to describe honeybees, right? Because the Romans observed that everywhere that Melissa grew, honeybees would show up. So I always like to recommend folks, if you're looking to get some cool pollinators and stuff in your garden, Melissa is going to be a great option here. So not only is she easy to grow, she's super delicious. You can make lots of good teas and foods with her, but she's also going to bring a bunch of buzzy buddies down into your garden. And that is always important. Anything we can do to be drawing in some pollinators is nice. Even though I live in Michigan, which is very, very far from lemon balm's native range, most certainly, that plant still attracts a lot of native pollinators in my garden, which is really, really cool to have. The more little buzzy buddies we got, the happier we're all going to be, right?
So super fascinating about the origins of the plant word, Melissa, the Latin name, which always, gives us these crazy insights, again, into the history of these plants. I'm about to get started with honeybee keeping here on our land in the Rocky Mountains. And that makes me want to plant lemon balm all around the bees because I've heard that it also creates an exceptionally tasty honey. I'm interested to know, you mentioned using the leaves in a tasty tea. So do you also put the flowers into your tea or your lemon balm lemonade, or do the flowers have a slightly different flavor?
Oh, this is a cool question. So I'll find that the flowers, it's a similar enough flavor that I could easily incorporate all the flowering tops into my tea, most definitely. But we have a little bit of a small scale seed business here at Small House Farm. And so I often will allow many of my plants to go to seed so we can then harvest those seeds. And of course, if I harvest the flowers too much, I won't have that seed production that I need. So for me, it's one of those things where I have to practice my patience, because it's like, oh, I got to slow myself down. I got to stop what I'm doing. Now I got to wait out for the seed production to happen. So it's a cool lesson that I get to learn in the garden every year, is to like calm down, relax a little bit, let nature take its course here, and you'll get something great out of it. Right now, you got to stop harvesting, but you'll have something nice to harvest later in the season.
Perfect. And that's the perfect lesson to get from lemon balm too, since it is considered, a calming herb, right? It can be cooling and calming, kind of help us mellow out. And that's what the plant's telling you, so you can get maximum harvest in all the different ways that you want to. I'd love to dig into this seeds side of things really quick while we're on the topic. How did you get started in growing seeds at Small House Farm? Where do you sell them? Are they available to the public? And what are some of your small scale methods that gardeners can use? Do you just go and collect seed heads from a plant like lemon balm, or do you have specialized equipment or methods for these different herbs in the garden?
These are fun questions. So, well, the story that I told about the handful of beans started me again on another wild tangent of seed saving. And so I started looking at all the plants that we were growing and how is this seed produced and when can I collect it and all this sort of thing. Through that, we kind of got connected into a community of seed preservationists, folks that are really interested in preserving diversity or saving the story and histories of these seeds. And some of those people have become lifelong friends, that we've spent time with. So I started to do everything I can to save these seeds. And some of them are more basic things like our lemon balm, or, and some of them are more historically interesting types of varieties. We do occasionally show up at seed swaps and offer our seeds that way. But for the most part, we have an online store at smallhousefarm.com. That's our website. And we've got lots of herbs and flowers, but we also do like tomatoes and peppers and beans galore. We offer some of the world's most interesting beans, I think. Over time, we've really gotten into, some of them are very specific to the place. They're indigenous varieties that have been grown here for many years. Some of them have traveled around, and they're a little bit more rare, unique, and exotic types of varieties, but ultimately they're all delicious. This is an important thing for me. I love to save stories and I love to save the history, and that's really nice for me. But I've also got to check some other criteria. I've got to grow stuff that's going to do well for me here in Michigan, but I also got to grow stuff that's delicious because I'm trying to grow all that delicious food. So all of our seeds kind of check all of those boxes. So that's really interesting. But as far as equipment goes, we are very small scale. My family grows and processes all of the seeds that we offer on our website. They're all grown right here. They've all touched my hands, you know what I mean? So we're not shelling beans by hand by any means, because I don't have time for that necessarily. But a lot of my bean shelling involves a baseball bat and a bucket, like banging. It's very small scale stuff here. One of the things that works for us, being, our whole place here is about 3.5 acres, and I work here full time when I'm not on the road, teaching or whatever, is that I can go out every morning and walk around and observe these plants through their life cycles, and I can be there when the seeds are ready and gather them in small amounts as they're ready. And then over the season, that accumulates into enough seeds to be able to then offer on our website, hopefully, if all goes well, each season. But it is very, very small scale. Harvesting seeds from herbs is this incredibly simple thing to do. The trick here is understanding when the seeds are ready, right? When are they mature? When are they ready to come off the plant? Then after that, we have to understand the dispersal mechanism of the seeds. Some of our seeds, like say lemon balm, is a gravity dispersal. Once it gets to a certain level of maturity, those seeds are just going to fall off that plant. You know what I mean? So you got to be there before that happens. You got to know at what stage is this mature enough that I can remove it, but not so far along that I'm going to lose them all as soon as I start to touch it. And then it's simply a matter of snipping off that flower stalk, throw it in a bucket. That's all you got to do. Seeds will fall out. You can sift it through screens and accumulate. Some of our plants, like our asters, lettuce, those sorts of things, they make seeds like a dandelion would. Asteraceae, it's the same family here, right? So they're wind dispersed. So you got to be prepared to catch them before the wind blows them away, right? So it just comes down to like, ultimately, that relationship with plants. That's understanding how this plant lives its life cycle and being a part of it. Gardening, herb growing, everything in our whole life is a series of relationships, right? It's the relationships that we have with each other, the relationships that we have with plants, the relationships that plants have with the earth, the relationships plants have with each other, whatever it is. And it's just nurturing and being a part of that relationship, being an active part of that relationship with the wild world allows us to observe these things and understand what's happening. And then we know when it's time for us to get involved in it. That's all that it really is, right?
Such a lovely way of looking at things, and it's also integrated, and then you're also having that relationship with the people that you're harvesting the seeds with, right? I mean, what better activity could you have with kids or with families and friends than like a seed harvesting and seed swap experience? I have a quick question when we mentioned harvesting and like knowing the maturity of the seeds. Obviously with beans, it's pretty simple. Like the pod is dry. You can hear them rattling inside, right?
Sure.
With the lemon balm, like you said, you want to get them before they go to the ground. With the Asteraceae family, you got to get them before they poof all over the place. What about a plant like coriander, which we usually grow for the leaves are called cilantro. The seeds are called coriander, where we're actually not just harvesting the seeds for saving to plant, but we're harvesting them for culinary uses. What's your recommendation there?
Well, see, these are the best ones, I think, where we're already planning on harvesting that seed because we want to eat it, you know? So we could use coriander as a good example of that, sunflower seeds. We could talk about corn, you know what I mean? Even the dried beans, right? The stages that we want to harvest them to eat them is the same stage that we harvest them for seed. And again, if you've ever grown coriander, it will make seeds and they'll drop right off that plant and grow more coriander for you, which is actually all right. I don't mind that, you know, but I do need to get those seeds. So again, once your plants start to flower, much like with that lemon balm, I've got to give it some space. I've got to let those flowers mature and do those things. And as we observe a coriander plant, first those seeds they're bright green. You can break them apart with your thumbnail. They're very flavorful at this stage. I really enjoy a green coriander seed. And then they'll start to darken up and they'll turn tan and eventually turn brown. And you'll see that the rest of the plant starts to die back as well because it's putting all of its energy now into seed production. Right? So the whole rest of the plant's going to die back. And then eventually that stem will die enough that the weight of the seed will cause it to drop off. But once those seeds go from green to tan, before they've turned brown, they're mature enough. You snip that plant right off, throw it into that bucket. They will continue to mature right there in your bucket. And then you can just knock them loose and you're going to have all of those seeds, right? So it's just, again, just taking the time to be aware of that stage. If you're growing it on a decent scale, if you've got a nice row of coriander, you can literally go through with a bucket and a stick and just bang those plants over the rim of the bucket, and the seeds that are mature enough will fall off of the plant into your bucket, you know? So you just got to walk down that row and give it a good whacking, and then you can collect up your seeds, you know?
I see a common theme here of whacking. You got a baseball bat, you got a stick, you just
It's a very violent situation. Yeah. It's good therapy. It's very good for you.
I love that. Okay, so you mentioned sunflowers. Could that be the next plant that we dig into? We don't often think of sunflower as an herb, so I'm very intrigued by this one.
So sunflower is, well, one of my favorites. We grow a lot of sunflowers here for a number of things. Of course, sunflowers make good trellising for some of our beans, which is really nice. But also we press seed and nut oil. And that's ultimately how Small House Farm got started, is that the foundation of what we do is seed and nut oils. Pressing oil. So sunflower is a very important crop for us here. We grow the sunflowers, we gather the seeds, we press the oil from it. Like I said, that's the foundation of everything. But these plants are going to offer us so much more than just the oil, right? Of course, the seeds are snackable. We can eat them. Every part of a sunflower plant is edible. This is an important thing to think about too, right? The seeds are edible, the leaves are edible, the pith inside the stem is edible, the petals are edible. All of that's going to offer us food, right? In the book I called it Super Sunflower Cornbread. And we made a cornbread where we used all the different parts of the sunflower plant. So we like ground the seeds and turned them into the flour, and we used the sunflower oil in the recipe, and we decorated the top of it with the petals and all that sort of stuff, Again, just to shift our perspective to see, that this one little plant, it actually can do so many things for us. Look at all this cool stuff that we can do with the sunflower. And sunflower is very easy to grow. What's cool about it is that there is a sunflower variety that'll basically thrive everywhere. If you find the right sunflower for you, you can find a sunflower that will grow. And they come in all different shapes and sizes and colors. And, there's an incredible amount of diversity in the sunflower world. So we grow typically like, the black oil seed, like you'd find in your bird seed, that's a high oil content, like the Mongolian giants, those types of guys with the big seeds. We're going to get better oil production out of those. But we also grow some other sunflowers just for the sheer beauty of it, for sure. Now, a lot of folks are going to direct sow their sunflowers. If you've got a bird feeder, squirrels are going to plant a lot of sunflower seeds for you. But what I find here in Michigan happens is when I start a lot of sunflowers by seed direct sown, in the garden, chipmunks and all sorts of little guys are going to come and make the most of my hard work. So we often will actually start sunflowers indoors and transplant them out, which can kind of be a tedious job. But I had to choose what my tedious job was going to be. Am I going to transplant all these sunflowers out? Or am I going to put those sunflowers out and have to replant them? Or am I going to put those sunflowers out and then put some sort of like row cover over it to protect them or whatever? You know what I mean? Like I just had to pick my challenge here. And for me, it just seemed to be the transplanting seems to be the move that works the best for me. But aside from that, sunflowers are wildly easy to grow and they're totally awesome in every way. They just give us so much. Last year we grew, we have, it's a half runner bean. It's a local bean. So a half runner bean only grows like 3 or 4 feet, the vine. So it's perfect for growing up corn and sunflowers and stuff. And traditionally in an indigenous Three Sisters garden, this is the style of bean that you would see. And we grew them up these sunflowers in this patch and it was really, really beautiful. And then it's funny enough, I brought some compost over to, to fertilize everything. And there must have been some melon seeds in the compost. So all these melons started to grow in there. So I had like a whole like alternative lifestyle Three Sisters garden going out there, with the melons and the sunflowers and stuff. Yeah, it was really cool. It was really fun.
That's so cool. I was going to say that's like a volunteer Three Sisters setup there. You weren't even expecting the watermelons.
Yeah,
and
awesome.
So you mentioned the pith of the sunflower also being usable. I've never heard about that before. What do you use the pith for? And what exactly is pith?
Okay, so the pith, if you were to take the sunflower stem, and if you were to cut it so you could see the cross section of it, the outer part of that circle would be very fibrous and tough. But the inner core of it is like this pith, and you can push that out and you can actually dry it and grind it and use it like a flour. If I would have been more industrious and had more time when we were working on the book, I could have incorporated that right into my cornbread as well, which would have been a nice touch, most certainly. But it is labor intensive to harvest that and get it, but it's important to note, I guess, that it exists just in case you want to make use of it. You know what I mean? If we look at like a lot of helianthus, of course, is an indigenous plant to North America. And if we look at a lot of these indigenous plants and we see so many of these traditional uses for them, even if we maybe don't have the time to do it, just to be aware that it exists and this long history of this use of this plant on the land that we live on, I think that's just as important.
Absolutely. And that sounds like the perfect addition to like a survival type garden, which is kind of a popular thing on the internet right now. People really want to know, how to grow sunchokes and potatoes and now like use their sunflowers, these really, fast growing, nutrient rich, like very high yielding plants. And we can use all these different parts of them. So that's really interesting that you could throw the pith in there. You could have the seeds, you can have the petals, you can just have a full sunflower meal essentially.
Absolutely, you could, and then of course the seeds, which are offering us the oils and all of these things. So yeah, it's a real it checks a lot of boxes for you for sure.
And of course, the beauty, because, well, one thing, I grew sunflowers on a cut flower farm quite extensively. And I would always be a little bummed because we would grow these special hybridized sunflowers that were pollenless. So they didn't dump all their pollen, on someone's table or, from their bouquet. So it was very like logical. But then I was like, oh, are the bees still going to love them? And the bees would still, clearly forage the nectar from them. They just wouldn't get the pollen. And that's just another interesting note of the biodiversity just in Helianthus. Because like you said, we've got like the American sunflower, the Mexican sunflower, and then we have like a million different varieties and hybrids where you can grow orange and pink and yellow and red and splattered colored. It's so exciting.
It is exciting. And I think you're making a good point here is the beauty of it all. And for many years I struggled with that. I was mostly focused on what's production. What can I produce? What's the most, how many calories can I get out of this space, or how much food can I produce here? And, my wife would always point out to me, she's like, well, there's more to gardening than just cranking out the food. And I'd be like, I don't know about that. But it's like with everything else, she was totally right. There's definitely something to be said about the beauty of the garden. The joy that it can bring us is very powerful stuff. Even if we're just growing flowers, or if we're just growing herbs for the pollinators, or if we're just bringing in, like, if we have a native plant garden and our only goal here is just to grow something beautiful, that is just as important and just as powerful as growing food. You know what I mean? Something that brings you joy. That's what we should be focused on.
Gosh, yes. I love that you said that because I relate to that so much. When I first started as an organic farmer, I was very like, I'm going to save the world and feed the world and prove to people that small scale organic agriculture is like way better than the industrial system. And we can do all this self-sustaining on our own scale. And I'm not going to waste time with any of this froofy crap. We are growing food. We are growing food for animals. We are focused. And I was like laughing at myself, as I grew over the years, when I would just like sit in the garden with a beautiful plant. Like the next one I want to talk to you about, Telsey. I would have these stands of like Telsey and Phacelia, holy basil and Phacelia. I would grow together and have all these purple flowers. And I could just get lost there for hours, just watching the bees forage on them, admiring their scent, not harvesting them, not eating them, not doing anything, quote, functional, except just like fueling my heart and my excitement to be in nature. And then, you look back on your younger self and you think, oh, you silly little one, you thought you knew everything. And now look at you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. For sure. For sure. I love holy basil. It is a plant that sings to me in a way that, I almost can't even describe. It is such a special plant. We grow a lot of it here. It's in the mint family, so it is quite easy to grow. Now, with our season here, we started indoors and we transplanted out once they're nice established plants. It's got a very tiny seed, and in the early spring, we get a lot of rains. And so with a lot of our small seeded crops, I don't like to direct sow them, even though I could probably get away with it in some cases, just because of the heavy rains. And that's going to make a mess of things. So we start them and transplant them out. But once they're out in the garden, you don't have to pay attention to them. You don't. I mean, they rock. They do so well for us, and I am just such a fan of it. We do like a tea tasting workshop. It's kind of a travel around type of class that we do where we bring all these different herbal teas. Yeah, it's so much fun, and we sample all these teas with folks. And really, at the heart of the workshop is the experience, right? So you can think of it almost like a wine tasting. So we're going to talk a lot about the aromas and the flavors, and I have everybody talk about their experiences with the tea. And it's so fun for me because, I've done this workshop well over 100 times with thousands of people. And it's always, I bring the exact same teas every time. And the different impressions that people have, the way that they describe the flavors, the way that they taste the teas is so different because we all have a different perspective, and we're all like, we describe things in different ways, and we have different palates or whatever it might be. So all of this diversity of experience, we are having a shared experience because it is the same tea, but we're all having a different experience at the same time. And holy basil is at the heart of this whole tea tasting thing. I've really introduced, it seems, a lot of people to this herb that haven't been familiar with it. They may have heard of Tulsi. They don't have a lot of experience with it. And I'm like, let's make some tea with it. I love the flavor of it. It's kind of lemony. It's kind of sweet. When I drink enough of it, I really start to think that it kind of tastes like juicy fruit gum. I really get a lot of that. which is an interesting thing to think about. That power of suggestion too, because I'll have everybody sip it and I'll say, "Don't you think it tastes like juicy fruit gum?" And they'll be like, "Oh, it does." Does it really, or am I just saying that? It's just a funny experience to have, but it's a beautiful plant. I love it so much. Holy basil is an adaptogenic herb. So it's said to help our bodies regulate the effects of stress, is what they'll say. You know what I mean? So it's calming. It's good for anxiety. It's good for stress or whatever. So in the book, I actually put holy basil in winter. Even though obviously here in Michigan, I'm not growing holy basil in the winter. There's no way, right? It's a tropical plant. It's not going to do that for me. But that's when we really are going to make the most use of it seems, because it helps us deal with the effects of stress. And I find that many people have a lot of stress in the winter. You know what I mean? Whether it's we're not going outside as much as we would like to. Maybe it's the holidays are stressful. Maybe it's having to deal with your family or your in-laws is stressful, or your lack of family. Whatever it is, there seems to be a lot of stress factors that people experience that time of year. And I thought, well, let's talk about this herb that's going to help us deal with that. So again, that's a good example of a herb that I put in there when we might use it the most, as opposed to when we might harvest it. But we grow and harvest, oh my gosh, so much of it. Last year I grew 4 65-foot rows of holy basil, and it was not enough to get through. Between all the tea tastings, the people that want to get the herb, the amount of it that we're going to use here at home, I cannot seem to grow enough of it. It's one of those plants that's like, you think you've got enough and you just don't. And so we just keep finding more room for it, Let's grow more of it. And what an awesome problem to have, because at the end of the day, that means I get to grow a whole bunch of Tulsi, and I can like go and harvest it. I can make tea out of it. I can roll around in it. I can do whatever I want. And boy, talk about, joy. It's such a fun experience for me to be able to have an excuse and a reason to be able to grow that much of one plant. We have a small space here, and we've got to produce a lot of different things. So it's not often that we can regulate that much of a garden space to one particular plant. But the people demand it, and I must do what the people say. So therefore, more Tulsi.
Yes, I love that. More Tulsi. And it's such a prolific plant. I used to grow it as a companion, actually, underneath rows. I had huge 100-foot greenhouses of 300-foot greenhouses.
Oh, geez.
Of tomatoes trellis straight upward, in 3 rows down the center. And then I'd grow Tulsi basil along the sides. And I quickly realized, like, these girls are going to overtake my tomatoes if I don't just come by and harvest them literally multiple times a week, because they're so prolific and they love to be so bushy. And it actually made me think back to years ago when I traveled to northern Thailand and I was up in the mountains, and there was this plant that looked like a Tulsi basil. It was a Tulsi basil, but it had a woody stem. And I was like, this is crazy, because we all see this as an annual herb that obviously cannot withstand any frost, but in its native range in the tropics, this thing was growing like a Tulsi tree, and it was flowering and seeding everywhere, and it had like these woody stems, and it just, never died back. And I was like absolutely just stoked, and all the people around were, just like, this girl needs to chill out. Like, she's obsessed with this. I'm like, do you guys understand? This is an ancient herb, and this plant specifically is probably like 10 years old and just keeps flowering these purple flowers and putting off these amazing leaves. And there's also, so many different types of Tulsi. Do you dig in at all to the different types?
Not so much, we've kind of grown a few of them. I've kind of let them mingle together. So this is a situation that, because again, for seed, where I have to stop harvesting the plant at a point to allow it to go to seed. So over the years, we have gotten a couple of different varieties of holy basil, and I've kind of let them all intermingle with each other at this point, and collected seeds from them. So what we're growing is it's a diverse population. So I couldn't say specifically even which type of Tulsi is happening at this point. So it's a little bit of everything.
I love that. It's your custom type. And then I have to ask, so you're a bit of a tea connoisseur, it sounds like, or quite a tea connoisseur, in addition to a coffee connoisseur. Excuse my chicory root reference.
I'll forgive it.
But when you're making tea from the Tulsi, I'm curious what you think about fresh versus freshly dried versus even frozen. People do like ice cube type teas. What's your favorite way to actually get the most aroma?
This is a cool question. So I'm going to say that the freshly dried Tulsi is going to give me the tea that I prefer the most. I do like a freshly harvested Tulsi, and I'll do that in the summertime. But I think that the dried herb is going to give me a little bit more flavor and aroma in the tea than the fresh does. But it's got to be freshly dried. What I've experienced with Tulsi is that it doesn't have the same type of shelf life. It doesn't keep as well as some other herbs might, where I can dry it and store it and have it for a year and it's still just as good and whatever. The Tulsi's not going to do that for me. As it gets older, it seems to lose a lot of its potency, its flavor profile and that sort of thing. So the freshly dried is definitely the best. I'm lucky enough that we go through it so quickly that I don't seem to have any of it for that long. You know what I mean? I'm going to run out of it before a year comes and goes. But when I have had Tulsi last that long, it seems to lose a lot of its oomph, you know? So the freshly dried, I'll shorten my answer. The freshly dried Tulsi is what I would prefer.
No, I'm so glad, Bevin, that you went into that depth, because that was something I learned in my herbalist journey a few years back from this really amazing herbalist named Tori Fillmore of Cedar Hill Homestead down in Tennessee.
Okay.
And she does a lot of online education, and she talks about the importance of freshly dried, because a lot of us think of herbs as, having this infinite shelf life. And then you get something with an amazing aroma like Tulsi or like lemon balm or any of the mint family herbs. And actually, if that's sitting in a jar or a bag, it's actually degrading over the years. It's not going to have as much aroma. It's not going to have as many, valuable, healthy constituents, and the color and everything can visibly fade. So I would love to know your insights on actually preserving and saving herbs. We haven't even gone into like tinctures and oils and distilling things. Like, you can go as deep as you want, but what is your method of choice for preserving an herb for a tea specifically, and how long it lasts? Do you keep it in sunlight? Do you want all your jars out? Do you want them in the dark? I have so many questions.
That's a lot of questions. So, I mean, first I'll say that a really nice way to preserve herbs for the long term is to incorporate them into a product, like a tincture or an oil or something like that. That's certainly going to extend its shelf life, especially as a tincture, like an alcohol extract. We could think of, like, even in the kitchen, we could think of like a vanilla extract, or we've done similar things with like lavender flowers. You know what I mean? That's essentially a culinary tincture, right? And the alcohol is going to act as a great preservative to extend the shelf life here. But if we're going to talk about teas, now some of the keys here is the herb needs to be harvested. You want to harvest it, obviously, when it's at its peak, for whatever stage of the plant that you're harvesting, after any of the dew is dried off of it, so it's not wet when you're bringing it in, right? And then you need to dry it as quickly as possible. This is a very important step here. If you allow it a long, arduous drying process, it's going to oxidize, it's going to lose its colors, it's going to lose its vibrancy. So we need to dry it very quickly. So here at Small House, we bring things into the pole barn where it's nice and cool. And we've got a series of screens. It's essentially like a bunch of shelves. They're basically screen doors on shelves. So it's a large screen system. It's on wheels. I can wheel it around. And it's got some fans, which is very important. So putting the herbs out on screens and putting some fans on them is going to, or airflow all around them, which is going to help them dry very quickly. Especially here in Michigan, because it's like it get pretty humid in the summer. And if it's very humid and my herbs are drying slow, as they dry, they start to absorb moisture from the air. And then they'll dry, and then they'll absorb moisture. And this is bad news, right? So getting the airflow around them is going to help them dry very quickly. And you want to dry them until they're nice and brittle. You don't want them to be bendy. You want them to crumble and break. And that's how you know this is nice and dry. Then you're going to want to strip it off of the stems and package it up. I put them in jars, airtight containers. You know what I mean? Keep them in jars, well labeled, of course, and then keep them in a cool, dark location. Same way that you would store your seeds. In a cool, dark location is going to be the best place for them. Now, of course, the rule of thumb they always say is about a year. These herbs are going to keep about a year. Get the herbs out and look at them. If they were properly dried and properly stored, a year is usually a pretty good window. Sometimes they can go longer than that. If the leaf or the flower, whatever it might be, still has a vibrant color, still has a strong aroma, if you can identify it, it's still good. But over time, like we talked about, that'll degrade. It'll lose its color. It'll lose its aroma. And then maybe it's not going to be so great for tea. You're going to lose a lot of that. Don't waste it by any means. You can give it to your chickens. You can make it into soaps. I've made fertilizers out of plants. You know what I mean? There's all sorts of different things we can do with them. So it's not a waste, but they may not be ideal for tea at that point. But I think the 1-year benchmark is the most important thing. Even if your herbs are stored very well and they're still totally great, if a year has come and gone and you still have like a whole lot of a particular plant in storage, you are doing way too much work. You're harvesting too much. You're overdoing it. Well, you spend your time a different way. You don't need that much, obviously, right? So it's a good way every year to kind of look back on what you've done and adjust things accordingly to be the most efficient with your time. Gardeners of all scales, whether they're running a business like we are or if they're just gardening on their balcony, we all have a limited amount of time that we can dedicate to our garden, right? So we want to be as efficient as possible with our time to make the most of that, to maximize our joy, which ultimately is the goal.
That's super helpful tips. I really appreciate that, especially for those of us that have, the aesthetic dream of like all of our mason jars full of herbs lined up with the sun twinkling in. It's like, that's not actually ideal because the sun is degrading them more quickly. Not that it's actually going to like harm them per se, but it's going to reduce that color and aroma, which is, most of what we're going for with teas.
Yeah, absolutely. The sun itself, but also the heat that would create is not ideal for these, so cool and dark are what we're shooting for, most certainly. We also, to talk about aesthetics, we tend to want to harvest and bundle herbs, make herbs into bundles and hang them because it looks totally awesome, right? This looks cool. We got these herbs hanging up and it's really beautiful. But I always try to advise against that because inevitably what will happen for me, I'll only speak for myself, but as I'm bundling up these herbs, I got a lot of herbs and I have a limited amount of time. So I'll start making bigger bundles and bigger bundles and bigger bundles. And what happens if your bundles are too big, you can't get that airflow to the herbs that are in the center of the bundle, which is going to cause them to go bad, which will ruin the whole bundle. So if you must bundle, be aware, be top of mind thinking about airflow amongst those bundles and make them small enough that all the parts of the plant are still exposed to the air to make sure that they still dry down quickly because ultimately that's the goal. So even though bundles look cool, and I love them, I do it myself. I love to hang some bundles around. It's not necessarily the most efficient or responsible way to dry our herbs all the time.
Thank you for that reminder. Love a good bundle or a dried bouquet, but yeah, I can totally understand that. So what is your favorite way in terms of creating like mesh trays? You're using like a fine like 1-inch wire mesh or something even finer to create screens?
Yes. So what we have actually literally done is we have gone and bought the stuff. You can buy them online. You can buy them at your hardware store to make your own screens, like your household window screens. And you can buy these kits to make those. So it's like big rolls of window screen essentially. And then we just fabricate little frames for them. And like I said, they're about the size of a screen door on average. Seems to be that's big enough and light enough. It's large enough that I can put a lot of herb on there, but it's still manageable that I can pick it up and move it around, or two people can if it's a really full one or whatever. But that seems to be a reasonable size. But you can repurpose old window screens, or you can buy kits for making. You'll see a lot of times for like drying seed racks and that sort of thing. Or I've seen ones that are like. You can buy them and they're kind of like a stack of screens and it hangs, so you can hang it in the corner somewhere. So there's lots of different ways to do it, depending on the scale of your operation. Not everybody necessarily needs to go buy a whole roll of window screen and build their own. Get an old screen door from the the surplus store or something, and that'll work really nice. Get a fan on it. It's also what I recommend. The screen is nice, but a little airflow from a fan is going to be a real game changer for you. It's going to help you dry those herbs very quickly, which again is the most important part.
For sure. You don't want any moldy herbs
No.
growing over there. So we are nearing the end of our episode. I wish I could ask you a million more questions, but before we go, I have to know your take on herbal infused oils. What is your method? Do you use fresh plant matter or dry plant matter? How long do you let them steep? Do you mix with alcohol first for more preservative? I am dying to know what you would recommend.
Okay, this is a fun question. So this is a big part of what we do at Small House because like I mentioned, we cold pressed seed and nut oils here. So that was really the foundation of everything that we do here. And many of the oils, we use them in the kitchen or whatever it might be, but many of them do turn into herbal products infused with, herbs and oils, whether that be something topical like a lotion or whether it be like a marinade or salad dressing, whatever it might be. So we do a lot of herbs infused in oils. So what I'm going to tell folks on average is, let's really basic stuff here, is dried plant material. Use dried plants when you're infusing an oil. Oil and water don't mix very well. If you're going to utilize fresh plant material in your oil, you're just introducing water into that oil. You're introducing bacteria into that oil. It's going to cause your product to go bad. So using dried plant material is, there's a couple of random exceptions to that, but we're not going to dig into that. For the most part, generally speaking, dried plant material in your oil. So we'll walk it through. I'm going to watch this. Okay. Ready? So you're going to get a container like a mason jar or something that looks like this. You're going to fill it up about halfway to 3/4 of the way with dried plant material. Then you're going to fill it to the top with oil. Okay. Whatever type of oil that you're using here. Then you're going to want to stir it up because there's going to be little air pockets trapped in here. So you stir it up to get all the air bubbles out. Bubbles, bubbles, bubbles. Stir it till there's no more air bubbles. Get all that out. Then you're going to cap it. You're going to label it. You're going to label it with the herbs that are in there, the type of oil that you used, and the date. You can either put today's date, the day that you've made the product, or when it's going to be ready. So you cap this jar. You put it in a cool, dark location for 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. Then you can get it out, strain it out, and you've got a wonderful herb-infused oil. Some people are going to want to use a slow cooker, crock pot type of thing. The warmth is going to expedite the extraction process. So if you're like in a pinch and you're like, I need this herb oil now, you can you can do that, and that, you'll be able to get it done in a few days, but it's not going to be as good as or as potent as a product if you give it the time to do its thing. So there's a real basic rundown on an herb infused oil for you.
I know it's an in-depth thing. You could probably write a whole book just on herbal oils. But...
As a matter of fact, I have. It's called The Artisan Herbalist, making teas, tinctures, and oils at home.
Wow. Okay. I have to get a copy of that one as well. But I love that you use the folk method because it's a great reminder that you don't have to be some special alchemist to use the herbs in your garden. If you want a really bomb olive oil to cook with, grab some sprigs of rosemary, dry them, put them in your olive oil, boom, boom, boom. You're good to go. And then of course, some herbs like St. John's wort, for example, you'll know it's extracted because it'll create that beautiful, deep red color to the oil, which is also going to happen in that 6 to 8 week period. So you can use, smell, observation, and the time method, right, to know if your extraction is successful.
Absolutely right. So we think about that imagine a cup of tea. So let's go to a water infusion. When you pour the water over the tea bag, you can see that almost immediately the water changes colors. You get the aromas and that sort of thing. So these are the signals in this case that the water-soluble chemicals are being extracted by your solvent, which is the water, to create the tea. And when you're making an oil, it's going to be the same thing. The fat-soluble chemicals are extracted from the plant material, and it's going to give you these different colors and different aromas. These are the signals that the plant's giving you that all the goodness is being pulled out of the plant, suspended in your solvent, thus creating your oil. Yeah, totally.
So freaking exciting. This makes me just really stoked to get back in the kitchen and start making things again because there's so many overlaps between gardening, herbalism, cooking. They're all working together to create that herbal lifestyle that you speak of. So I wish I could talk to you much longer, Bevin, but I really appreciate your time. I know as a former organic farmer, spring is such an intense time to take these hours out of your day. So we really appreciate you joining us.
Logan, this has been a blast, and I do not mind taking a break from all the work to come and hang out with you. I would sit and talk with you for hours for sure. So I really appreciate having this time to spend with you today for sure.
Awesome. Well, we'll let you get back out to the field. Just real quick, tell our listeners where they can find your books or your website, more about Small House Farm, more about what you're doing. We'd love to get them following you online and hopefully learning more of these amazing details. Now I know you have another book I have to buy.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, they could find all of our stuff. They can find our books, our seeds, our herbal products, our oils, links to our YouTube channels and social medias and all that jazz at one simple place, which is smallhousefarm.com.
All right, smallhousefarm.com. This is Bevin Cohen, author of Herbs in Every Season and several other amazing books. Thanks again for joining us. Everyone have a beautiful herbalicious day.
Thanks, Logan. Bye-bye.